Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well today. This is going to be our mind map focused review session for the Module 2 quiz on the anatomy of the heart. So keep in mind that this quiz is only going to focus on identifying the structures in the lab list. The functions quiz will be a second separate quiz from this one. So in this quiz we're only looking to identify structures in the diagrams. So that's what we're going to accomplish here with this focused review and mind map session. So we'll start with structures on the center and right side of the heart, starting with the first structure there, which is the aortic arch, which is the body's major systemic artery. It's going to give rise to all the other systemic arteries that we'll see in the blood vessels module in Module 3. Item 2 is the superior vena cava. It's a vein that drains blood from the upper part of the body back to the right atrium. Item 3 is the right pulmonary artery. It's going to take blood to the right lung, specifically the capillaries in the alveoli of the right lung. Item 4, that is the pulmonary trunk, which is the main artery that's serving the right and left pulmonary arteries that will branch from it. Item 5, those are the right pulmonary veins that are returning blood to the left atrium from the capillaries of the alveoli. Item 6 is the right atrium. Item 7 is the fossa ovalis, which is the remnant of a fetal structure called the foramen ovale. Item 8 is the tricuspid valve, which is also called the right atrioventricular valve. That serves to prevent backflow of blood from the right ventricle to the right atrium when the right ventricle contracts. And we'll see a little bit more about the mechanism of how that particular valve operates when we get to the function side of things. Item 9, that is referring to or pointing to the right ventricle, the space in the right ventricle. Item 10, that is the chordae tendineae, which are the tendinous cords that help to anchor the valve flaps for the tricuspid valve. And item 11 is referring to the trabeculae carneae, that is the little bars of cardiac muscle that line the walls of the right and left ventricles, although specifically this one's pointing to the ones in the right ventricle. And item 12 is the inferior vena cava, which is a major systemic vein that is returning blood from the abdomen and the lower limbs back to the right atrium. Next, we'll shift our focus to the left side of the heart and the structures belonging to that. So item number 13 there is the left pulmonary artery, which is taking blood to the capillaries of the left lung. Item 14 is the left atrium. Item 15 are the left pulmonary veins, which are returning blood from the capillaries of the alveoli of the left lung. Item 16 is referred to as the bicuspid valve. It also goes by the mitral valve or the left atrioventricular valve because it's situated between the left atrium and the left ventricle. Item 17 is the aortic valve, which is a valve that's situated between the left ventricle and the aorta, and we'll see a little bit how its function works when we get into the functions side of things for the heart. But basically how that valve works is that when the left ventricle relaxes, it'll prevent blood flow from the aorta from going back into the left ventricle. So that way the left ventricle can relax without having blood that it has just ejected being returned to it. Similarly, item 18 is the pulmonary valve, which functions basically the same as the aortic valve, except the pulmonary valve is situated between the pulmonary trunk and the right atrium. Item 19 there's identifying the left ventricle. Item 20 is identifying the papillary muscle, which are little pieces of muscle that anchor to the chordae tendineae, and they help to put tension on the chordae tendineae when the left ventricle or even the right ventricle contracts. Even though item 20 is only identifying the papillary muscles in the left ventricle, if we look over to the other side of the diagram, we can see that there are papillary muscles in the right ventricle as well. Item 21 is the interventricular septum. That's the muscular wall that is situated between the right and the left ventricles. Items 22 through 24 are identifying structures in the heart wall. 22 is the epicardium, 23 is the myocardium, and 24 is the endocardium. Next, we'll take a look at the two major circulation pathways, keeping in mind that we have the pulmonary circuit, which is the arteries, capillaries, and veins that are serving the alveoli of the lungs. That is, that's the circulation pathway that is exchanging respiratory gases. So it's picking up oxygen in the lungs and eliminating carbon dioxide. And then that blood from the pulmonary circuit will be returned to the heart to then enter the systemic circuit. So once that blood has eliminated most of its carbon dioxide and picked up oxygen, it will be returned to the systemic circuit. And all of that oxygen that has been picked up by the blood is going to be delivered to all the cells, tissues, organs, and organ systems that are being served by the systemic circuit. So real brief breakdown of that circuit. If we focus on the pulmonary circuit first, in the diagram below there we see that the pulmonary trunk, which is in blue and leaves the right ventricle, is delivering relatively deoxygenated blood to the capillaries, the pulmonary capillaries in both the right and the left lungs. Those capillaries will pick up oxygen from the lungs, from the alveoli that are in the lungs, and then the blood in those capillaries will be returned to the left side of the heart through the pulmonary veins and into the left atrium. That blood in the left atrium will move to the left ventricle, and then the left ventricle will pump it into the aorta. And the aorta is going to be the major systemic artery that is serving the systemic arteries, capillaries, and eventually veins in all of the tissues in the body except for the alveoli of the lungs. So the pulmonary circuit is mostly concerned with bringing blood to and from the capillaries in the alveoli of the lungs, and the systemic circuit is concerned with bringing blood to the arteries, capillaries, and veins in everywhere else in the body with the exception of the alveoli in the lungs. And that's what we see in the upper and lower parts of that diagram here. Although they have overly simplified the capillary beds in the upper and lower parts of the bodies, realistically those capillary beds would be found in all of the organs, all the muscles, the bones, the nervous system tissue, in either the upper part of the body or the lower part of the body. Next, we'll examine the structures of the heart wall. We've already seen the first two in our last diagram of the heart, and those structures are the endocardium, which is the very thin epithelial tissue that composes the inner lining of the heart, and then we have item 2, which is the myocardium. That's the part of the heart wall that is the thickest of the layers in the heart wall, and it is mostly constructed from cardiac muscle tissue. So as its name myo implies, myo means muscle, and so that's the muscular layer of cardiac muscle tissue that's associated with the heart. Item 3 is the pericardial cavity that's filled with pericardial fluid because the fluid acts as a way to reduce friction between the heart and the rest of the structures in the thoracic cavity, so that when the heart beats, it can beat without friction, because any kind of friction would create damage and inflammation and swelling in the heart tissue, and so that fluid really just helps to prevent any kind of buildup of friction as the heart beats. Item 4 is the fibrous pericardium, which is a very thick, dense connective tissue that helps to really prevent the heart from overfilling, but also helps to anchor the heart to some nearby structures in the thoracic cavity. Item 5 is the parietal layer of the serous pericardium, because the items 5 and 6, the parietal layer and the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, are actually part of the same structure. The parietal layer simply wraps around the heart and folds in on itself to form the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, which is also called the epicardium. And that folding in on itself is what creates the pericardial cavity so that the fluid can be contained within it. Because both the parietal and visceral layer of the serous pericardium are a membrane, and they secrete the fluid that's found in the pericardial cavity. Here we'll examine a few of the structures of the coronary circulation. Coronary circulation refers to the blood vessels, the arteries, and the veins that are serving the cardiac muscle, the myocardium itself. Beginning with item 1 there, that is the right coronary artery, which is one of the main coronary arteries that's delivering blood that is saturated with oxygen to the myocardium to nourish the cardiac muscle tissue. Item 2 there is the small cardiac vein, which is returning blood from the myocardium. Item 3 is the left coronary artery, which is the second major artery that's taking blood to the myocardium. 4 is a branch of the left coronary artery called the circumflex artery, as is item 5. Item 5 is the anterior interventricular artery, which is also a branch of the left coronary artery. Item 6 that we can see on the anterior side is the great cardiac vein, which is basically returning blood from the tissues that the anterior interventricular artery delivered that blood to. Similarly, on the posterior side at the bottom there, we can see item 1, the right coronary artery, again, the small cardiac vein, as well as the circumflex artery. The new items that are on that diagram, we can also see the great cardiac vein as well in item 6 on the posterior side as well. The new items on that diagram are item 7, which is the posterior interventricular artery. It's an artery that serves the myocardium on the posterior side of the heart. Item 8 is the coronary sinus, which is essentially the major vein that is receiving blood from the small, middle, and great cardiac veins and returning it to the right atrium. And then number 9 there is the middle cardiac vein, which is draining blood from the myocardium on the posterior side of the heart. Our last set of structures that we'll examine are part of the intrinsic conduction system, and these are the specialized cardiac muscle cells that function more like nervous system tissue because they stimulate the heart myocardium to contract. The first item that we have there is the sinoatrial node, which is located basically at the junction between the right atrium and the superior vena cava. That is the overall pacemaker for the heart. It sets what is called sinus rhythm for the heart, which sets the baseline resting heart rate at around 75 beats per minute. Item 2 is called the atrioventricular node. The atrioventricular node will stimulate the ventricles to contract. Meanwhile, if I kind of back up there, the sinoatrial node, when it fires, it will stimulate the atria to contract and will also stimulate the atrioventricular node. The atrioventricular node is, when it fires, it will stimulate the ventricle muscles to contract. The atrioventricular bundle is a bundle of tissue that makes its way down the intraventricular septum. It's also called the bundle of His. Item 4 are the right and left bundle branches, which are found within the intraventricular septum. And then the right and left bundle branches make their way down almost to the apex of the heart, and then they branch even further and fan out into the outer walls of both the right and the left ventricles. And those fibers, or those tissue structures, are collectively referred to as the Purkinje fibers. There is a set of right Purkinje fibers, which serves the outer wall of the right ventricle, and a set of left Purkinje fibers, which serves the outer wall of the left ventricle. The Purkinje fibers are also referred to as the subendocardial conducting network, so whichever you find easiest to remember or easiest to spell, both of those are referring to the same structure.